This is Salmond on Sunday on LBC, leading Britain's conversation. Our topic is, has Boris blown it? Phone 0345 6060 973 or text 84850 or tweet at LBC. What Sir David says this afternoon is he's surprised and disappointed, and goes on to say it confuses, as you rightly say, gross and net contributions. It assumes that payments currently made to the UK by the European Union, for example, in support of agriculture and scientific research, will not be paid when we leave, and then finishes up, it is a clear misuse of official statistics. I mean, can you remember a time when the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority spontaneously, apparently, wrote such a letter to the Foreign Secretary?
No, it's certainly unusual. I read the article very carefully, and I seem to remember Boris said that we'd have a lot of extra money to spend on the health service, but he didn't actually say in the article there'd be 350 million extra each week as a direct result of leaving the European Union. But what I do think will happen is when we leave the European Union, we'll clearly be able to spend the net amount on our priorities. We may well wish to continue to spend the money that we previously got back from the EU on the areas that were in receipt of it, certainly in things like agriculture. We want to have an agricultural subsidy system, which may look very like the one we're leaving in the short term while we think through a more interesting policy.
John, you and I have been around politics a fair amount of time. I mean, 30 years.
Build the growth rate up, because I think when we follow a policy in the national interest, not any longer constrained by all of the EU economic controls, I think we can grow a bit faster.
Yeah, John, just to give me an honest assessment, because this has been genuinely puzzling me. I mean, you and I have been in politics for 30 years now, and we got elected in the same day, way back in 1987, if I remember correctly. Is this the sort of letter, Sir David Norgrove's letter this afternoon, that would be written spontaneously by the chairman of the Statistics Authority?
I have no idea.
You're an experienced politician, John. You've seen just about everything over the last 3 decades. I think it's unprecedented. I mean, usually what happens, if I'm right, is if a government minister makes a claim, usually in the House of Commons, and somebody then refers it to the UK Statistics Authority, they kind of adjudicate after a period of time. I certainly, off the top of my head, I can't remember a sort of spontaneous rebuttal within hours of an article being written.
No, I agree with you. It's unusual. But the way to find out why the gentleman concerned wrote it would be to ask him, how on earth can I be expected to know when I haven't talked to him, and you were the first person to tell me about this interesting missive? But again, it's a second or third order issue, as it always is, isn't it? Why can't we talk about how Britain is going to be better off when we've left the EU? If we put in place certain policies as we leave, we could actually speed up our growth rate a bit, because I don't think the growth rate is currently fast enough. The growth rate within the EU has been a bit slower than when we were outside the EU before we entered. It's not going to be easy to get it higher than it's been in the EU, but that surely should be our aim.
But John, I agree with you about the attacks on Boris Johnson on the timing of his article. I don't really see that was under his control, but nonetheless these attacks were made. But this seems to me far more about the substance. And this question of the 350 million figure, what it actually meant, was it a misuse of statistics or was it a fair argument? That's one of the issues certainly central to the Brexit campaign of last year. I mean, there's no denying that was a major part of the campaign.
You're not interviewing either the author of the article or the author of the letter. I have been absolutely crystal clear before the referendum and after that the savings we can spend on our priorities the day we leave, assuming we've cancelled all the contributions, which I want us to do, are the net savings, but there are also the gross savings to be taken into account, and that in due course we can look at how the EU has been spending the money they send back to us and decide whether we're spending it in the right way or whether we could find a better way of spending it. But we have no immediate plans, for example, to divert a whole load of agricultural subsidies to somewhere else.
So, John, if I can summarise you, Boris is loyal, and this is all a bit of a storm in a press teacup. Would that be fair?
Well, you're now doing to me what Andrew Marr did to Amber Rudd. No, they are not my words.
You're accusing me of being Andrew Marr.
What I think. I think Boris...
But you think it's been got up by the press, yeah?
Set of comment. Well, why don't you, if you want to interview me, why don't you listen to what I got to say? I think Boris made a set of very optimistic and interesting comments that were entirely consistent with government policy. Various people, for their own reasons, now want to have a row about why and how and the exact script that he gave. But the broad picture is a very good one. And on the money, a lot of us think it's absolutely crucial that we cancel all the contributions from the day that we leave, because one of the big wins which we put to the public and which they liked when they voted leave was to be able to spend that money on our priorities.
Thank you, John Redwood. This is Salmond and Sunday on LBC, leading Britain's conversation. We've got tweets raining in about whether Boris has blown it. We've got Louis who's saying Boris needs to prove there's a net gain at all before bragging about National Health Service money from Brexit. A bit more supportive of Boris for Mary, who says if Rudd thinks she will run for PM, she'll never take the northern vote when she has imposed fracking on the north. But Carlos from Devon is no Boris supporter. He says Boris is to Brexit what Juncker is to Remain. I'm interested in the Amber Rudd comments. I think it was Amber Rudd who said that Boris was the sort of person you'd like to have a drink with at a party, but you wouldn't want him to have you driving home at night, which indicates that he's good fun, he's jolly, he's interesting, he has a deal of charisma. But whether or not he is the person to be Foreign Secretary, or for that matter Prime Minister, opinions would be much more divided on that. It's certainly a major topic today as to whether his intervention in the Brexit debate has been well timed to reposition himself as the leader of the Brexiteers, or is it going to incur the entire wrath of the Tory party upon him in the run-up to their conference? That's the topic of discussion today. Has Boris blown it? So what do the listeners think? Let's go to James from Grimsby.
Hi, Alec.
Good morning, James.
At the moment, I think politics has become very polarised. There seems to be no middle ground. It seems to be extremes. Now, Boris is playing to his strengths. You know, it's unfortunate when it was released, but he's playing to his strengths. He's playing on Brexit, which will keep him popular, and that is in this country is what's happening. So he knows that'll keep him in the forefront. It keeps him popular. He's not interested in, the actual ins and outs of what's happening. He will make these sound bites and rhetoric, and that's what keeps him popular. You see it with Farage, you see it all over at the moment. We have become a country. I mean, if you mention anything against Brexit, you're removed and you're slapped down. The exact same if you mention leave. Like I say, there seems to be no tolerance. There is no middle ground, and it keeps them popular.
James, you're from Grimsby, but I don't detect a Grimsby accent there. I detect something a bit further north.
Yeah, I'm kind of originally from a little town called Clydebank.
I know it well, James. Yeah. But listen, Boris Johnson's been, up until this bombshell article yesterday, he's been pretty quiet, has he not, for the last few months?
He has done. When we first came out of the EU, it was like everybody took a sharp and take a breath, and it's sort of the enormity came on us, and he disappeared. As did most of them. Look at Farage, he disappeared. But the fact when the 52% came, he thought it was against him. He was already calling for a rerun, and then the minute he realised that they'd won the vote, it was he kept his mouth shut at that point, and then we all got called Ramoners are saying the same thing. And we keep getting this thing about the British people rammed us down our throat. Sorry, and there was only 52%, but only over a third of the British electorate voted to leave. Yet we keep getting told it's the will of the British people. 2 nations out of the 4 nations voted to remain and are getting dragged out. So how is that democratic at all?
Well, that was one of my points in the referendum campaign, James. I suggested to David Cameron that there should be a double lock in the referendum. That is, that all the 4 nations of the United Kingdom are equal nations, according to David Cameron, should have to say Brexit before Brexit could happen. Incidentally, if he'd accepted that, he'd still be Prime Minister.
Yeah, but we're now getting classed as unpatriotic, almost treasonous if you mention that we don't agree with this will of the British people. It's got ridiculous. Like I said, it's become polarised. It's extremist actually in this country. When we get people like Farage who can make sound bites, you've got Johnson who makes sound bites, and they always fall quiet for a little while, and then the Brexit thing comes ahead. You start making the rhetoric again and makes them popular.
And how would you rate politics? How would you rate the significance of this, which I think is an unprecedented intervention this afternoon from the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority, who has written to the Foreign Secretary basically saying he's misused official statistics and giving him a thorough ticking off and dressing down?
But that's always been his way. He's always misused information. I mean, we've got the misinformation by May this week about was it unemployment's down to 4 point something%. Even proper statistics prove that's not true. You know, it's a lot higher. I think it's closer to 20% because we're taking in things like through our contracts, all sorts of things. It's actually, people misuse statistics all the time. It's quite a known thing. In fact, did you yourself not fall victim with was it Nick Robinson that time when he altered one of your questions on about people, was it leaving the country if Scotland went?
Well, I think Nick said I hadn't answered the question when, unfortunately for him, people were watching the interview on a live play and found it somewhat different. But what I think's interesting about this intervention from Sir David Norgrove is usually, as I was saying to John Redwood, what happens is the UK Statistics Authority is called in as a referee. In this case, the referee, that's Sir David Norgrove, seems to have taken matters into his own hands. There's a second aspect. I mean, Damien Green, who's the sort of Deputy Prime Minister, was on television this morning saying, look, there was nothing in the Boris Johnson article to worry about that he disagreed with. Well, that means, by definition, he's getting ticked off as well by Sir David Norgrove. So I think this intervention by Sir David Norgrove might have a fair bit of mileage in it. Even if politicians have been known to doctor the occasional statistic, I think this one might be more significant than most.
You'd like to hope so, but I mean, history teaches totally different. We've got this all the time. How many times did we point out about the 350 million? Yet it still keeps getting referred to. When we all know it's a lie, but for some reason it seems to, some people seem to relate to it and use it as an excuse, and it ticks people up. And I just feel as though politics really at the moment is almost comical. If somebody was to stand aside and watch what's happening, they wonder what's going on.
David, thank you very much indeed, James. That was a summary of politicians, which I think many listeners will certainly agree with. Another tweet has come in from Stephen in Walton on the Hill, who says Johnson is PM, bad enough a laughing stock as Foreign Secretary, but PM, and then there's about 5 question marks after it, doesn't bear thinking about. Tories would be even more unelectable. But not everybody must think that. I mean, Boris must have some supporters out there. So let's take another call from Mike in Bridgend in South Wales.
Oh, hello there. And just like to say, Alex, I don't agree with your politics, but what I've always said to my family, in my experience, in my understanding, I would say that you're the most formidable politician. In terms of, I don't agree with what you say, but the way you argue your case, I think, is always generally has the better of it.
Well, thank you, Mike. I didn't know I had relatives in Bridgend in South Wales, but there you are.
But whenever I watch you, I very rarely see you getting bested, even if I disagree with what you're saying. What I will say is I don't care what politicians say, ultimately. I don't care what Boris says. I don't care what, you say. Ultimately, all I care was there was a vote, and basically that vote is that, pretty much. And everybody's fighting against it, but pretty much the die is cast, the deal is done. It's pretty much a fait accompli, and it's all going to go through. Whatever deal we get, it's going to all.
But Mike, did you listen to what James had to say a few seconds ago? I mean, he was phoning from Grimsby, although he was originally from Clydebank, and he was saying, look, he didn't think it's fair that people who voted for Remain like him, were somehow being cast as enemies of democracy because they wanted to maintain their European connection. There's surely a lot of sense in that.
Absolutely. Well, I would never criticise. There's too much on both sides of people saying, well, you're not patriotic. But basically, you're this or you're that. I don't really care. People can have their opinions. It's not a police state. But basically, and it's all well and good saying only a third voted, etc. But there was a vote. It could have gone either way. It didn't. And basically, and ultimately, when you lose, you lose. And that's unfortunately. I mean, I was on the Leave side, but if Remain had won, I would have walked away and said, well, I'm not going to revisit this again, personally. It would have been done as far as I'm concerned. 2 votes, done. And all these people saying that we would have carried on fighting, some people would have, but most people would have just said, well, that's it, we're in, and that's it.
Well, thanks for that view, Mike. But the subject today, of course, is, has Boris blown it? Will he ever get to be Prime Minister, or has this latest bombshell article ruined his chances again? But first, let's get the latest on Parsons Green, the terrorist outrage, and an update from the LBC's Paul Smith, who's in Stanwell. Paul, what's the latest?
Yes, that's right, Alex. Well, this search has been taking place for the past few hours now, but the big breaking news this hour is that the UK's terror threat level has been lowered from critical, which means an attack is imminent, to severe. That means an attack is highly likely. Now, this is crucial because following on from Friday's attack at Parsons Green, an 18-year-old man was arrested yesterday in Dover. The threat level remains at critical because police weren't sure if he was part of a wider network or if he was operating alone. Last night, a 21-year-old man was arrested in Hounslow, and that is being linked to today's search here in Stanwell. The officers are at the house just now. The forensic teams are here. It's pretty much low-key to what was happening yesterday in Sunbury, where there was a massive evacuation from properties and residents were displaced last night for a number of hours before they were eventually
Paul,
let back.
Are you saying that the lowering of the alert, the terrorist alert, from critical to severe would tell you that the police are now confident that they have rounded up the suspected perpetrators of the Parsons Green attack?
That's what it sounds like. Obviously the review goes on, always at the threat level. It sounds like the police are now confident they have the people involved in the Parsons Green attack on Friday. It sounds like the threat obviously has reduced. It isn't as severe as what it was. It's still that severe, meaning an attack is highly likely, but police seem to now be confident they have the people responsible for Friday's attack.
And Alan, from what we're expecting what do you anticipate the next development to be, Paul?
Well, as I said, there was a raid yesterday in Sunbury, and that's not far from here. Where we are just now, you can probably hear, it's just next to the runway at Heathrow. Planes taking off every few minutes, so it's very close to the airport, and I think we could continue to see raids taking place over the next hours and next few days. Obviously, police are questioning the two men that were arrested yesterday, and until they are 100% confident they have all the information they need and have all the details they need, then that's when we will stop seeing the raids and stop seeing police activity. I mean, this street is very, very quiet side street, a lot of elderly residents, and one man actually I spoke to when I first arrived here, quite important, he told me that he knew the person who lives in the house which is being raided by police as we speak. He says he works, the man works at Heathrow Airport, this is the neighbour, and every time he goes out there's always a light on in the property that's currently being searched by police between 1:30 in the morning and 4:30 in the morning. He said the gentleman who lives in the house is very pleasant, always speaks to him, and he always has friends round as well. And he says the house is empty. There's no furniture in the house, there's no TV, there's no sofa, but they always used to have console type things in their hands. Now, he wasn't clear whether they were game consoles or what they were, but he said they were always playing with a type of console. His friends never used to speak to him, but he did say that the person who lives in the house is friendly and always used to chat, and he always used to have family down from Scotland as well. Not clear where about in Scotland they're from, but he said his family were pretty nice, and the gentleman who lives in the house which is being raided just now had a Middle Eastern accent, but that's all he could tell us about him.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that latest update on the Parsons Green terrorist outrage. This is Salmond on Sunday. You're listening to LBC, leading Britain's conversation. Our conversation today is, has Boris blown his chances of becoming Prime Minister? Plenty of views raining in on this, and the latest is from Io in Wallington. On you go.
How are you? Hello?
Very well, thank you.
Hi. Okay. My view on the matter is that Boris Johnson, he's an extremely selfish person, right? I mean, he's widely perceived to be a likable buffoon, right? Now, what people do not do is no one thinks about how competent is he to run the country. Now, a good number of people who seek high office do not have an opportunity to demonstrate their fitness or otherwise of office. Now, he had, as a mayor of London. Now, he did not perform spectacularly.
Far be it from me to play devil's advocate for Boris Johnson, but let me have a go. I mean, he was re-elected as Mayor of London, so he couldn't have been a total dud if he got himself re-elected. And I suppose the Boris supporters would say, that he's actually somebody who's proven his electoral competence as opposed to the current Prime Minister. Is that not an argument in his favour?
Indeed. But let me tell you one thing. A good number of people who decide on who to vote do, who to vote for, do so on the basis of perception. Now, Boris is perceived to be a very, very likable and charismatic person. And that's why when there's an election, they put him out there to campaign because people warm up to him. Right. And that's because he's perceived to be charismatic, no one stops to think, actually, how competent is this guy? And his competence, I don't think, places him in a position to, aspire to the highest office in the land. Apart from that, now, at a time when the government should be united, right, and, trying to get the best deal out of Brexit, at that point in time, he now decides to launch another bid for the leadership of the party in a bid to become prime minister. Now, that's quite selfish because that's not what's needed at the moment. And then the other thing is that, unfortunately, one of the side effects of Brexit is that it's now turned this country into a single-issue country. Now, aspiring to become prime minister is a lot more than Brexit.
So a single-issue country, you think, because Brexit is consuming all the political debate?
Now, yes, it's a substantial issue, but there are other equally important issues that need to be taken into consideration. And now it seems to be, you want to become the prime minister. The sole criterion is how good or how sound are you on Brexit? And that's very wrong.
How do you rate the importance or otherwise of this intervention, this unprecedented intervention, I think, from the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority, who has written this afternoon to the Foreign Secretary accusing him of a, quote, clear misuse of official statistics? Do you think that sort of thing is going to hold Boris below the waterline?
Well, I think that's a very wrong thing to do. And I think, for many people, does that really count? No. Because, you see, the perception of Boris, and that's the most important thing. He is perceived to be a very, very likable person and so on. But then, go back so many years, he used to be a journalist, and he was fired from a major newspaper. Now, not many people know the circumstances that surrounded his dismissal from a major newspaper. And that's the kind of guy he is.
I think he was accused of inventing European stories when he was a Brussels correspondent, if I remember right, Io.
That's correct. Now, not many people know that. He's just perceived to be, one of us. He's a nice guy. He's not your typical politician. Now, that doesn't make you a successful prime minister or top administrator in this country.
Can I ask you one last question, Io? Are you looking at Boris's behaviour, which you're very critical of? Are you looking at it from the point of view of somebody who wants to see the Tory government more united, or are you looking at it from the point of view of somebody who'd like to be shot off the lot of them?
Well, I think it boils down to competence. You see, for me, whoever wants to become the prime minister of this country, whatever party he comes from, he has to at least be very, very competent. Now, is Boris competent to become the prime minister of this country? No. Io,
thank you very much. You've made your position very clear. But before the break, I was appealing to Boris Johnson's supporters because the tide has been running very heavily against the Foreign Secretary thus far. And I'm delighted to say that David from Wimbledon has come on the line to give Boris some support. David, you're on.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Yes, look, I read the article this morning. Actually, I read it out to my 100-year-old cousin. And I was kind of interested, in terms of what you and the media and politicians who clearly obviously have an opposing view. And I think, like John Redwood, I think it was very uplifting, it was very positive. And what I don't hear about Brexit, it is always this sort of constant pulling down by people that oppose the outcome of the vote. And however you look at the vote, the people voted in a legitimate referendum. You can cut it and slice it in any way in which you want, but the decision was made. And I think Boris is saying, look, we're a great country. We can move on. There are great opportunities ahead of us. Let's go for it.
David, a couple of things. I don't agree, for example, with the criticism that was made of Boris Johnson by Ruth Davidson or Amber Rudd, for that matter, saying that the timing was inappropriate. I don't see how he could possibly have anticipated there was going to be a terrorist incident in Parsons Green. I thought that was a low blow against him. However, this kind of substantial point this afternoon from the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority, Sir David Norgrove, I mean, this seems to be a bit more serious to me. I mean, basically, he's saying it's a clear misuse of official statistics. And as I was discussing with John Redwood, I cannot remember the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority spontaneously writing to a senior politician as opposed to adjudicating on a complaint that was made retrospectively. I mean, don't you think there's a substantial point about this £350 million for the National Health Service per week false claim?
Well, look, I don't know exactly what the precise figure is, but I mean, you know, Alex, you've been in Parliament, as you said, for 30 years. The amount of porkies that our politicians tell us, I mean, we could be here for hours and hours. You know, I think, yes, there's perhaps a misrepresentation of the statistic, but it's still a significant amount of money. And I think that's the point. I don't ever remember it saying that 350 million was going to the NHS. It could go to the NHS. But the other point is when you talk about statistics, I mean, I remember very clearly at the time, Project Fear was, you know, the UK economy was going to collapse. We were going to lose 500,000 jobs, yet we've created 1 million jobs since that time. I mean, yes, of course. I mean, you know, we've got zero-hour contracts. I mean, not everything is perfect out there. But, you know, we have got to get over this negativeness of coming out of EU and look at the positive. And all I see, I mean, from politicians, from the Liberal Party, from the Labour Party, from the SNP, your party, is, look, you know, we cannot possibly survive outside of
But David, do you not remember, on the LBC with Fiann Dale, I was heavily critical of Project Fear, heavily critical of George Osborne, said that wasn't the way to fight the referendum from the Remain side, that you couldn't scare the people of England into doing what you wanted. I mean, I think you should maybe give me a bit of slack from your general criticism, and certainly I'm not part of Project Fear.
And look, I think you have been a great politician, and I think I always am very interested in the way in which you argue your case. And that is terrific. But as a party, if I was, let's say, to look at your leader, Nicola Sturgeon, it's always negative. I mean, there's nothing really sort of, you know, positive. I mean, I think if you're going to take people with you, you need to be positive. And I think this comes back to what Boris Johnson was doing. I think he's trying to take people and to show them that there is a positive path forward. I don't think he was stamping it out and putting, you know, making his mark, I want to be Prime Minister. I think he's trying to show people that there is a positive way forward. And I thought he put it in extremely good words. I mean, looking at, what has gone on in the past in the EU, we were told, I mean, the ECU, that, that coming out of the ERM would be a disaster for us. We were told if we didn't go into the euro, it would be an absolute disaster.
David, I'm old enough to remember the hard ECU from Norman Lamont. I don't know if you remember that one, the hard ECU. I think most folk weren't sure what the ECU was, never mind the hard ECU. But listen, you put forward a very intelligent and passionate defence of Boris Johnson, and one thing perhaps we agree on is the optimism which I think should be in politics, and I think you're absolutely dead right there. But you're not alone in supporters of Boris Johnson. We've managed to tempt out some Boris supporters. Robert from Farnham in Surrey, for example. Robert, you're on.
I am. Hello, Alex. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. On you go.
Well, no, actually, your last caller, I thought expressed it very well. And, at the end of the day, I read that article. I read it quite carefully. And by the way, I don't believe Amber. I haven't read it. And I actually think it was...
Yes, I thought that was a bit suspicious myself, Robert. I was watching her eyes when she said that. I think that was, how shall I put it, something she wanted to say, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't take that long to read. I read it, and I thought it was a positive article. I thought, look, here's someone making a positive case for Brexit. I actually voted to remain, but now the vote's kind of gone the other way. I personally think we should just get on with it, and I think it almost feels like a patriotic duty to try and get the best outcome for this country. And if you're constantly arguing that we can't do it, or we're going to fail, or we can't survive without being in a single market or the customs union, I actually just think it comes to a point when it's so negative about a prospect for this country, it ceases to be believable. And also, I don't accept that Boris Johnson was making a bid for the leadership. Of course, he's an ambitious man, but this would not be an appropriate time to strike out for leadership. And you can't have a situation where you have a Minister of State, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and he's not permitted to lay out his vision with a positive statement. And apart from anything else, he didn't really say anything that was contradictory to government policy. I mean,
except, of course, this 350 million figure, which he's repeated, which the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority has chosen to write to him to give him a thorough ticking off for this afternoon. Now, if the government says they agree with everything in Boris Johnson's article, by definition they must agree with the 350 million figure, so therefore the chairman of the UK Statistics Authority is actually telling off the entire government as well as the Foreign Secretary. Is there a kind of logic there, Robert?
No, I don't agree with that at all. In fact, I haven't got the article in front of me, but I read it very carefully. He's basically making the point that we pay in 350 million, and it would be possible to use some of that money to pay into the NHS, to modernise it, to improve it. And I think everyone understands that you pay in a gross figure. The EU then decides how some of that money gets spent for you. So, you know, at the end of the day, if we leave...
Which is an interesting point, Robert. I've got the advantage on you. I've got this, which I think is a truly remarkable letter from David Norgrove. He starts off by saying, "Dear Foreign Secretary," so that's so far so good. Then he goes, "I'm surprised and disappointed that you've chosen to repeat the figure of 350 million per week, says why it's wrong, and then ends in a pretty short letter, "This is a clear misuse of official statistics." Now, that's a pretty heavy condemnation from somebody in Sir David Norgrove's position, is it not?
Well, to be honest, I don't put too much store by that, because I wouldn't be at all surprised if he is politically motivated in wanting to use the letter in that way. And you know, I think everyone knows that was the gross figure. That is the amount that we paid. Is he disputing that we paid 350 million to the EU?
No, he's saying it's the gross, not the net figure, and doesn't take account of what we get back. But Trevor from Wembley's got a view on these things as well. Trevor, on you go.
Yeah, hi, Alex. Yeah, I really can't take Boris seriously. I mean, you know, I compare him to Diane Abbott, you know, and that's not a compliment, you know, because they just both have the knack of just, they got big mouths, right? But in my opinion, what comes out of their mouth is just rubbish, basically. You know, and I don't.
Trevor, I've been quite surprised by, you know, we've had tweets and phone calls raining in, like yourself, critical of Boris Johnson. Until the last two callers, we hadn't had anybody who was in favour of him. Does that surprise you, given the track record he's got electorally, particularly in London, but the popularity he's had elsewhere?
No, it doesn't at all, Alex. Because, as I said, I can't, you know, he's the sort of guy you can't take seriously. I mean, it's not about the way he looks, his mop of blonde hair. It's not even the way that he talks. It's just that he just comes across like a grown-up child. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it.
Would it be a man-child? Is that, would that be the right? Yeah.
Yeah. He's always trying to be funny, you know. And don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, I think, you know, he's obviously got a sense of humour, but I think when you're dealing with politics, you've got to put that aside and be serious. You know, we got this Brexit thing coming, and he's coming out and you know, contradicting what Theresa May is saying. You know, and it's just, you know, I really can't understand that guy. You know.
Trevor, thank you so much. Well, we've had divided opinions on Boris Johnson, but the tide has been running pretty strongly that he may have blown it. I actually think he has blown it. I think his timing, not because of Parsons Green, which he couldn't have been expected to foresee, but because of the run-up to the Tory conference and it looking very much like a leadership bid. I mean, usually if you wield the knife, you can never inherit the crown. So this story will run and run over the next few weeks, but coming up next is the news from Catalonia and why are Spanish police barging into newspaper offices looking for ballot boxes, and of course the latest updates on the terrorist incident at Parsons Green. Well, that's enough on Boris, but it's not enough on Europe. This week, armed police forced their way into newspaper offices looking to confiscate ballot boxes. Elected politicians are being threatened with fines or worse for pursuing their democratic mandate. Where is this happening? Is it South America? Or perhaps Erdogan's Turkey or Putin's Russia? No, it's happening in Spain, or more accurately in Catalonia, that ancient nation in the northeast of Spain. Now, most people know something about the Catalonian capital of Barcelona, if only for the Camp Nou or the Nou Camp, or for Gaudi, or for holidays there, or for those who've got long memories like myself, or for the Olympic Games, which took place in Barcelona. But we are now only 2 weeks away from a referendum on Catalonian independence. Or are we? The Spanish government are taking a hard line. They will not countenance the poll, hence the armed police and the threats to elected politicians. They have determined to stop this ballot. So our second question of the day is this: should Catalonia have the right to vote and the right to decide its future, or is the Spanish hard line the right approach? Now here's one MP who has strong views on this, Andrew Rosendale, the MP for Romford. Andrew might surprise some people because he's a Conservative MP, but he's a Conservative who has a very distinctive view on Catalonia. We're going to hear from Andrew in a few seconds, but I want to broaden this conversation. So to join in this conversation about Catalonia and whether they've got the right to decide, phone 0345 6060 973 or text 84850 or tweet at LBC. The question is about Catalonia and its right to decide. The right to decide its own future as an ancient nation in the northeast of Spain. Now, the tweets are still raining in about Boris. We've got a few here. Alex Salmond, love your first show on Salmond and Sunday on LBC. I'm at work. This is from Dylan Kennedy. Another tweet from Jose, perhaps, since we're going to talk about Spain. Don't let Boris distract. Let's keep our eyes on the ball. This and past governments do not look after their own people. Tweet, and this comes from Sikander. I don't trust any of them. It's all a lie. Boris fooled the public, then backed out and betrayed the Brexiteers' trust. That's from Sikander. But now I want to move the conversation elsewhere in Europe. The conversation on to Catalonia and Catalonia's right to decide its own future. This is unusual. Not unprecedented in Spain, of course. It's only a generation since Spain, of course, was under a fascist dictatorship. But it's certainly unusual, unprecedented for a liberal democracy to see armed police moving to confiscate ballot boxes in newspaper offices, and elected politicians, including the president of Catalonia, being threatened with large fines or perhaps even more severe punishments if they pursue their democratic mandate. That is not what normally happens in liberal democracies. And I've been struck by the relatively low aspect of comment on this matter, because we've heard a bit about it in the papers as the decision day approaches, but not a huge amount given the enormity of the consequences. So before we go to the House of Commons and Andrew Rosendale, let's hear from somebody who's on the ground, quite literally in the eye of this Catalonian storm, and that's Raúl Romeva, who is the Foreign Minister of Catalonia. And he's phoning us from Catalonia. Raúl, tell us exactly what's going on at the present moment and what your opinion is of what the next 2 weeks might hold.
Well, actually, first of all, thank you very much for calling, and I think that's very important that we simply can explain what's the situation down here. The situation is dramatic in the sense that there is a constant violation of fundamental rights. As you probably have read in the newspapers, we have more than 700 mayors that have been now called. This is
mayors in Catalonia, Raúl. For our listeners here across Britain, could you tell us just a little bit about the background in terms of, Catalonia's status as an ancient nation, and why you think Catalonia has the right to decide, the right to self-determination?
So basically, there is a question of political will at the end. Some say that this is a problem of legality. Well, we contest this. The thing is that we could go back, if you want, to the regime of the 78 after the Francoism. The situation since there was that Catalonia is always trying to find its place within Spain. But the real problem started in 2010 when the Constitutional Court sentenced against the Catalan statute, which was adopted very democratically, absolutely following all the mechanisms that were foreseen on the Constitution and on the legal frame. And despite this, simply because of a political and electoral interest. The Partido Popular, the current party in government right now, at the time it was not, but now it is, they made a political situation about this, and they brought this to the Constitutional Court. In 2010, there was this sentence, and this was the breakout of the current situation. Before that, there was around 12% of the people that was defending Catalonia to be independent state. The big majority was defending a kind of a federalistic approach within Spain. But this situation in 2010 made absolutely a radical change.
So there's been a big shift in opinion towards independence, and now, of course, you have within the Catalonian Assembly a majority of pro-independence parties. Not all the same party, but a coalition of pro-independence parties. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct, and that shows, actually, if you follow all the polls, at the end, is not, and that's something we like very much to stress, is not about independence, is about democracy, because the huge majority in Catalonia is the 80% of the population, according to all polls, 75%, 80%, is demanding to solve that situation democratically, voting.
See, the point you're making, Raul, without putting words in your mouth, is there's a difference between support for independence, which is obviously running strongly in Catalonia, but may or may not be a majority, and support for having the right to decide on independence, which is, by every measure of opinion, a huge majority. Would that be correct?
That is correct. That's exactly the situation. That's why we very much insist on the fact that this is not about independence. This is about democracy. And this is why what is happening right now is so unacceptable. Because, first of all, you are simply putting in danger the legitimacy of defending one political project. You may agree or you may disagree with, but it's legitimate, which is the independence. But beyond this, what you are putting in danger is the fact itself that the people can express itself in one sense or the other. So you are impeding those who want to vote yes, but also those who want to vote no. What we are demanding is that everybody could be allowed to express themselves, and obviously to start a debate, a political debate from that perspective. The problem is that so far it has been impossible to sit around a table with the Spanish government in order to talk about this. That's the real concern we have, which brings us to a situation that we have to do it because there is a public demand. The society demands that this needs to be solved.
So tell us where you are exactly at the moment, Raul. With 2 weeks to go before your proposed referendum, we read this week that the armed Spanish police are entering newspaper offices, are searching for ballot boxes, are determined to put a spoke in your wheel. Yes. Well, what's happening today in Catalonia, and what's likely to happen over the next 2 weeks?
Actually, in 2 weeks' term, I mean, the 1st of October, this is the date where the referendum is going to take place. But today, and it happened yesterday, and probably will be tomorrow and the day after, what the police is doing is going into all the public events, all the meetings, all the public debates. They are trying to ban. I'm saying trying to ban because sometimes they succeed, but some others what they do is simply make the debate or the act move to another place. All those kinds of public events. They are going to all the printing houses in order to take every material that could be related to the referendum. They are blocking the websites. Imagine this in the 21st century, in 2017. This happens only in some countries in the world. One of them is Spain, blocking websites, trying to impede people to have access to a website where there is information related to a referendum. That is the situation so far.
But Raul, if the Spanish police are doing this, then why are you so confident that the referendum will be able to go ahead if they are trying to confiscate ballot boxes, ballot papers, if they're invading newspaper offices, if politicians like yourself are under threat of fines or even imprisonment? Why do you think this referendum will be able to go ahead under these conditions?
For one single reason, because every move they do into that direction, there is a response double and triple of the society in the same sense, which means that when they take some material, the printing of new material is doubling. When they try to impede one act in one place, well, when this act moves to another place, the people attending that act is doubling. What I'm trying to say by this is that any attempt they do in order to stop this to happen is motivating even more people, also those who are not supportive of the independence, but who are radical Democrats, radically Democrat people that simply could not accept that way of acting from the side of the Spanish government. What I'm saying is that this is not about independence. This is about fundamental rights. This is about democracy, the spirit of democracy, not only in Catalonia, in all Europe. And that's why so many people in Catalonia, but also outside Catalonia, is mobilizing itself against that way of proceeding from the side of the Spanish government. We have been warning about this since years. We have always been warning that this was about democracy, that this was about letting the people express themselves, as actually it happened in Scotland. We demanded for years.
And how much support, Raul, have you had from other Europeans in terms of what's going on in Catalonia at the present moment?
Well, you know that this is something that actually, because it was the same situation in Scotland, officially everybody is saying that this is an internal matter of the Spanish state, which simply brings us to a situation of saying, well, we very much understand this, and that means that we need to do what we need to do in order to show that the legitimacy of doing what we're doing is there. On the other side, we always insist on the fact that our way of doing this, the way we understand is the best way, would be the Scottish way, which means let's try to have a pact, an agreement with the Spanish government, and do what the Scots did in 2014. It has not been possible, basically because the Spanish government is saying that this is illegal. That is our battle, because we are contesting this by saying, no, this is not illegal. This is perfectly legal. The problem there is not about legality. The problem there is about political will. And that's why we are very much putting the action not on the independence itself, but on the democratic weakness and fragmentation that nowadays we are living in Catalonia and in Spain as such.
Thank you, Raul. Raul Romeva, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, right in Catalonia, in the very eye of a democratic storm. Our conversation now is about Catalonia and whether the people of Catalonia should have the right to decide their own future, without interference from the police of Spain, armed or otherwise. Now, Andrew Rosendale is the Conservative MP for Romford. He's the Vice Chairman of the all-party group in the House of Commons in Catalonia. Andrew, as a Conservative, many people would expect you to be suspicious of Catalonia's right to self-determination, but I don't think that's the case, is it?
No, well, good afternoon, Alex. It's good to speak to you again. We miss you in the Commons, but glad to hear you're on LBC. Well, as you know, because we work together on a number of things when it comes to self-determination and the rights of peoples to determine their own destiny, then I don't see why Catalonia should be any different to any other historic nation on the earth that makes those kind of decisions. Every territory, every country makes their own choices about their own destiny. And I think that Catalonia has just as much right as Scotland had to have a legitimate referendum, just as all of the British territories have chosen to be British and they've had their referendums. Why does the Spanish government refuse to give those same rights to the people of Catalonia? I don't understand it, and I think that the people of Catalonia have every right to determine their own future.
And Andrew, a lot of people are being pretty mealy-mouthed about what's going on in Catalonia just now. I mean, these stories about armed police storming into newspaper offices, as I was saying, you might expect this to be happening in South America or perhaps Turkey or perhaps Russia, but certainly since the days of Franco, you'd hope and expect it not to be happening in a liberal democracy in the continent of Europe.
No, it's quite shocking and completely unacceptable that this kind of behaviour is happening. But the trouble is with Spain, and we've seen this and how they use the police to, they use the police as a political tool. The government in Madrid used the Guardia Civil, which is the police of Spain, to actually use it against things that they don't like politically, and they do this with Gibraltar, as you well know. The Guardia Civil are always causing difficulties for Gibraltar, and they're being used again in Catalonia. It's completely wrong, and it's not the kind of thing you'd expect from a modern democratic country in Europe.
Andrew, you're being very forthright in your views, and thank you for that. I would expect nothing less from you, Andrew. So, in that line, I mean, you're clearly backing Catalonia. Can I just ask you finally, are you backing Boris as well in his intervention in this weekend, which has caused so much of a storm?
Well, I agree with Boris that we should leave the European Union and do it on the basis that we spoke about during the referendum, which is not being tied into things that actually keep us half in and half out. So he's right in what he's saying, but I don't believe that this is a leadership bid. I think that Theresa May, actually, she's been pretty solid on this. She hasn't capitulated to those that want to water it down and make Brexit sort of half in, half out. She's actually stood rather solidly on this. And actually, Boris has done a tweet actually giving full support to Theresa. So I think this might be a bit of a media invention. I'm not 100. I mean, Boris has not spoken to me.
Andrew, if I had £1 sterling, incidentally, for every Conservative member of Parliament who said exactly that phrase to me this morning, there hasn't been a message gone round to tell an independent-minded member of Parliament like yourself to pursue a certain line about this story, is there?
Absolutely not. Nobody's spoken to me about it at all except you today. The reality is that I think that it would be completely counterproductive to put the Conservative Party and indeed the country through the turmoil of a leadership election and a new Prime Minister. We've just got to get on with the job.
One last question, Andrew. You're an experienced parliamentarian. You've been very forthright in foreign affairs, very forthright in Catalonia. This intervention from Sir David Norgrove of the UK Statistics Authority, who's written this afternoon to the Foreign Secretary, accusing him of a, quote, clear misuse of official statistics in the £350 million a week for the National Health Service claim. How do you reckon on that? I mean, is it credible that that's the sort of thing that can happen spontaneously, or do you think it's more orchestrated than that?
I couldn't comment on that. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. All I can say is this. The money that was promised for the NHS, or was seemingly promised for the NHS, ultimately, when we do leave the EU, there will be more money back in the British Exchequer, and that can be used for the NHS or whatever public service and whatever priorities we have. So I think that, looking at actual exact figures at this point is foolish. I think what we've got to do is to look to where we're going to be in a few years' time once we've left the EU, once we get back control of those finances, and in fact start doing free trade deals around the world and become a more prosperous country.
Andrew, it's great to speak to you again, and I hope to speak to you again very soon. In the meantime, we've got Dina from Maida Vale in London, who's got some observations she wants to make about Catalonia and about liberal democracy as a whole. Dina, you're on.
Oh, hi, Alex. Great to have you on the show. I don't believe we're living anymore under a liberal democracy. And I think that was clearly illustrated by Brexit and by Donald Trump being in power. I think there is still a sense of the will of the people. And when you look at someone like Tony Blair, it's clear that the will of the people do not want him dictating our ways anymore. So that is still very, very prominent, that people do count. And at the end of the day, they actually have more power than anything.
And are you as shocked as I am by the events in Catalonia at the present moment? I mean, in fairness...
I'm not shocked.
No? On you go.
Shocked. I'm absolutely disgusted by it, but I'm not shocked, no, because I think in England we have what's called the rule of law, due process of law. And actually the Spanish law has got lots of elements in it that still... have got from the Moors. There is still a sense of they don't have the same kind of democratic process that we do in our rule of law. And that is why the police actually are allowed to represent the state at any time, because they have a completely different legal system. Now, I don't agree with that, but I'm not shocked that it's going on. And I think when Margaret Thatcher came into power, she sat down in Downing Street and decided to get rid of our due process of law. And she created managers in her own likeness and sent them into the NHS and into schools. And she just created a whole pile of policies and bypassed the democratic process of law.
But Dina, don't you think that it's incumbent on all of us not to accept these things, whether they're happening in Catalonia, where you're disillusioned with the political process elsewhere, and the more that people speak out and speak up, then the better in terms of protecting liberal and democratic values.